Good evening, everyone. It's a great evening. I request everyone to just come forward and occupy the seats. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Team Unifi, I extend a very warm welcome. Our sincere thanks to each one of you for taking the time out and spending the evening with us. Today marks a significant milestone in Unifi's calendar as we embark on this exciting and an equally responsible mutual fund venture. As we prepare for an exciting evening ahead, let's take a moment to offer our prayers and gratitude to the Lord Almighty. For that, I call upon Srivatsan, a renowned classical vocalist, to mark the beginning with an invocation song.
வாரணமுகவா துணை வருவாய் அருள்வாய் தயவாய் வாரண முகவா துணை வருவாய் அருள்வாய் தயவாய் வாரண முகவா துணை வருவாய் அருள்வாய் தயவாய் வாரண முகவா துணை வருவாய் அருள்வாய் தயவாய் ஆரண பொருளான ஆரண பொருளான ஆரண பொருளான ஆரண பொருளான ஆரண பொருளான கந்தகானாமுதத்திற்குன் கருணாமுத முதவிய அருள் மதவாரண முகவா துணை வருவாய் இன்னிசையல் இலக்கியம் ஆரியம் தமிழ் அறிவேதுமின்றி கண்ணலன்னை கந்தகானாமுத நன்னூலை உன்னும் கவி குஞ்சரதாசன் நான் உன்னருள் கொண்டே பண்ண துணிந்தேன். உன்னும் கவி குஞ்சரதாசன் நான் உன்னருள் கொண்டே பண்ண துணிந்தேன். முன்னவனே நீ முன் நின்றால் முடியாததொன்றில்லை, ஆதலதி வேகமதாகவே வாரண முகவா துணை வருவாய், அருள்வாய் தயவாய் வாரண முகவா துணை வருவாய், அருள்வாய் தயவாய். The song is from a 19th century work. It's an invocation to Lord Ganesha. The composer, before writing one of the magnum opus works in Carnatic music, he calls upon the Lord to bestow strength and courage to him as he stands on the cusp of a milestone moment and says that with the Lord standing in front, even the most impossible tasks are within reach. Thank you.
Thank you, Srivatsan, for such a wonderful and beautiful rendition. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure in welcoming Mr. Sharat Reddy, who has been the driving force behind Unifi. With an unwavering commitment to excellence and a deep belief in creating long-lasting impact for all stakeholders, Mr. Sharat has transformed this organization into what it is today. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Sharat Reddy, founder and Chief Investment Officer, Unifi Capital, for presenting his opening remarks. Sir, the stage is all yours.
Good evening, everyone, and wish you all a very warm welcome. When we sent our invitations out to all of you a couple of weeks ago, we heard back from some of our well-wishers saying, the invitation says, please attend a dedication. And why dedication? Why not a launch? And I thought I should share with you why we said dedication. We've been in, Unifi is now 24 years old. Over 24 years, we deal with about 11,000 families all over India. We launched the first scheme of the mutual fund on the 3rd of March, closed on the 7th of March. In 5 days, we have 2,200 investors. Although a lot of those are references, although a lot of them are references from all of you and our colleagues, the understanding that we have of the mutual fund space is it's very different. It's not like what we have done for 24 years. In 24 years, we related to people. In the mutual fund, we won't have that opportunity. There'll be thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, and we won't know them. They won't know us. Yet, their savings are with us. Their dreams and aspirations are our responsibility. And like any company, our intent and our plans are also driven by capital, human resources, technology, process, all of that. But I don't think that is enough. It's clear to us that that is necessary but not adequate. We need to build a foundation that is something bigger to bear the trust of people we will never know, people who expect so much of us. And that is the reason we said we need a team that understands that this is not a business. It has to be a dedication to people you will never meet. And that's a cultural building block, call it a DNA of the firm, that we want to set forth from today. And that's the reason we said dedication. Thank you. This room is just full of people I've known for so long. It's just fantastic to be in this atmosphere. The other thing that happened last evening, one of our colleagues got married and we were all attending his reception. So one of our long-term well-wishers, a lady, a doctor, she asked me, listen, why did you get into this space? And I think the inference was obvious. She knew, as much as we did, that this is a highly competitive space. There are already 40 funds, and the world doesn't need the 41st. And on the face of it, seems illogical that we would venture into a space which has been vacated by people like JP Morgan, people like Fidelity, big companies who came in and said, we don't want to continue in this space in India because it's just intensely competitive. Like everyone else, our objectives, we're going to do the same building blocks. We are blessed with a great set of people. There are about 5 guys who spent more than 15 years with Unifi, who have shifted to Unifi Mutual Fund, and we're going to build around them. So this core building block of 5 is now grown to 30, and we have people from other reputed firms who've brought their learnings and added to our own. And we've added technology, we've added processes. But there is clarity that if we have to make a go of this, we're going to have to do things a bit differently. And we said the only way is to draw upon our learnings of the last 24 years. And I've tried to distill that into 3 principles that we followed, and I just want to share those 3 principles with you. The first thing that we did is we always did a few things, and the intent was to do a few things and to do them well is a blessing. We focus all our resources on making sure that the few things that we take up have a higher probability of success. And that's the spirit with which we want to approach the mutual fund. Our plan is we'll have only 3 funds for the next 5 years. In all likelihood, we'll probably be the fund house with the least number of funds in the whole country, and we're very happy with that. It gives us an opportunity to do a few things and to do it really well. The next thing is I'd like to draw on a lesson that we learned from an essay written by Swami Vivekananda more than 130 years ago. And he said that most people focus a lot of energy thinking about outcomes. And he said, instead, it would be more productive if you focus that energy on the inputs, because you control the inputs. And if you focus on the details of the inputs that you control and worry less about the outcomes, you'll probably get further. And with that spirit, we found that it works well. And with that spirit, George and his team, my request to them has been, just think like that. Don't chase too many things. And what you chase, put all your undivided attention into and focus on the details. The third and the last principle is something that we learned from Dr. Kalam, Dr. Abdul Kalam. And he would often say, strength respects strength. And I think he said it usually in the context of defense preparedness. But if you think about it in business, it's the same thing. If we are prepared, well prepared before we begin anything, the chances of our succeeding is obviously significantly better. And that's been a guiding principle. Do a few things, focus on the details, and make sure that you're prepared before you get into something. So these are the 3 principles, and will these principles help us do better than some of the biggest names in the world? Time will tell. But the good thing about Unifi, I think, is we are not in a rush. We got here over 24 years, and we have no targets, we have no numerical goals. We've never begun a year saying we want to achieve X in assets under management. But we've always set ourselves goals in terms of the quality, the process, the people, the quality of people. And that's the spirit with which I hope we'll continue to work. I think I've said enough. I want to turn to our guests. Mr. Damodaran, sir, it's a huge honor to have you with us. You are a practitioner of a lost art, sir. When actually people ask me, how did you pull it off? How did you get Mr. Damodaran to participate? And I think the honest answer is actually simple. Mr. Ramchandran, who's the chairman of our trust board, he introduced us. And with his introduction, when I made the call, I received not just a spontaneous yes, but a very warm and a very gracious yes. And that's an art that I wish more people still remembered. It feels wonderful to have you here. We couldn't think of a better person to set us on our way. Thank you, sir. I thought we were going to introduce Mr. Kishore Mahbubani to Chennai when I reached out to him through one of our fellow board members, because I had been following him for a few years, and I thought people in Chennai didn't know enough about him. But after we sent out the invitation, the number of people who it turns out know him very well from his YouTube conversations, and the number of people who are here today to listen to him more than anything else. I know I'm standing in the way of Mr. Kishore Mahbubani and all of you, and I'll step aside in a second. But thank you very much, Kishore. You're usually on the trunk routes, and Chennai is a laid-back town compared to the towns you lecture in. But it's a delight to have you. Thank you. And we've been blessed, particularly blessed, with the most passionate and committed set of board members that I've ever experienced. And you'll meet them in a moment, but I want to thank all of them, our trustees and our board members, for giving us all the energy and passion that you do and keeping us on course to hopefully make a decent go of this. Thank you. And friends, all of you, many of you I know are here from Bombay, Bangalore, quite a few, Hyderabad. It's a huge privilege to have such relationships. These are relationships that are, many of them are decade, 2 decades old, and I hope they will survive the next few decades. And I can't thank you enough. It's very special that all of you are here. Thank you for the time and giving us this evening. Thank you. I thought about whether I should take a few names, but I think it would be embarrassing for you, so I'm not going to take names and say thanks. There are just 2 names, though, that I want to take. One was a gentleman who, when we started out 24 years ago, gave us encouragement that made us feel confident. And we lost him in COVID. His name is Mr. Sharat Reddy. Some of you know him. He was a huge help. And I want to thank his wife and Mrs. Urmila, his daughter. And there's one more person, and that's my mother. And in 24 years, she's never attended any Unifi event. And she's never asked me what I do. I think she has an idea, but she doesn't get involved. But it's her value system on which I stand. Thank you. So with that, I'll pass it on to the next. So, Mr. Damodaran, could you kindly step up to light the lamp? And also, could I invite all our trustees and board members to also step up to light the lamp?
वक्रतुण्डमहाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः।
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next, I have the privilege of inviting Mr. Ramachandran, Chairman of Trustee Board, Unifi Mutual Fund, and former Chief Managing Director, Andhra Bank, to introduce the chief guest for the evening.
Distinguished dignitaries, good evening, everybody. I have been given the proud privilege and honor of introducing Mr. Damodaran. Does he require introduction at all, is my question. It is like carrying coal to Newcastle. Who doesn't know him? He is an iconic figure in the financial regulation and governance space. Nevertheless, formality requires that I introduce him to the elite audience. Mr. Damodaran has held a number of important assignments in the central and state government and in the Indian financial sector, including Chairman Securities and Exchange Board of India, Chairman Unit Trust of India, Chairman Industrial Development Bank of India, Chief Secretary Government of Tripura. I understand he was the youngest chief secretary the country ever had. While at SEBI, he was elected chairman of the 80-member Emerging Markets Committee of the International Organization of Securities Commission. After a successful stint at UTI and at IDBI, where he successfully led the turnaround efforts, and at SEBI, where he introduced improved corporate governance practices, he has set up Excellent Enablers Private Limited, a corporate governance and board advisory consultancy firm. His pioneering role in promoting corporate governance in India invests EEPL with an experience-based leadership role in corporate governance, advisory work in addition. He is presently a consultant, advisor, coach, and a mentor. He is an independent director on the boards of Larsen & Toubro and Biocon Limited, and was till recently an independent director on the boards of Tech Mahindra, Hero Motor Corporation, and Chrysler. He is a nominee director on the boards of Bajaj Allianz General Insurance Company and Bajaj Allianz Life Insurance Company. He sits on the advisory boards of certain foreign entities too. He was the founder chairman of the Indian Institute of Management, Tiruchirappalli. He was the chairman of Ministry of Corporate Affairs Committee for Reforming the Regulatory Environment for Doing Business in India, and chairman of the Reserve Bank of India's Committee on Customer Service in Banks. There is something which you may not find in Google search about Mr. Damodaran, that is his connection with Chennai. He is an alumni of the Loyola College, Chennai, our Loyola College, and he also had a stint at IIT Chennai before he joined the administrative service. And as Joint Secretary, Government of India, Ministry of Finance, he was overseeing the affairs of Indian Bank during the troubled times and was largely responsible for the bank getting recapitalization from the government those days in 1990s, I'm telling, and then ensured that the bank was in safe hands to get into the position where it is now. We are privileged, sir, to have you as our chief guest. Over to Mr. Damodaran.
Good evening, friends. I cannot describe to you what a privilege it is to be here with you in this city for this function. This is a city where I spent some of my best years with no sense of responsibility at that point of time, and therefore it added to the happiness. I was not responsible for anything that was in the realm of my parents' jurisdiction. I could take liberties at that time, such as there was a reference that Mr. Ramchandran made to my having gone to IIT. I am one of India's earliest dropouts from the IIT system. I wear it like a badge of courage because you need courage to go out of IIT. I don't know whether it was a decision I took based on courage, but now I seek to justify it on the basis of courage that I exhibited when I left that place. I say this because two of my classmates from IIT are here in the audience, and I'm delighted to have been able to connect with them after all these years. I did a little arithmetic, though I was not very strong in that. 34 plus 25, 59 years ago is when I walked out of there. I'm delighted to see both of you here, Rajiv Khanna and Vasant Manikam. So I owe a lot to this city. I was associated with Indian Bank, not just as the person who was privileged to be in that particular seat in the ministry when the bank went under and its obituaries had been written. Some of you might remember that the CII had recommended its closure and government was on the verge of accepting it. Those days, economic policy meant seeing eye to eye with CII. So if CII recommended something, that was almost certainly likely to be accepted. But as an outsider to that particular relationship, I got in the way. I was the obstructionist who said, no, we don't need to close this bank. We need to fix the bank. We fixed it, and as Mr. Ramchandran said, it is a bank that for several months on the trot was number one by all parameters in the Indian banking system. But I had an earlier relationship. My first paycheck was also from Indian Bank. My first job was as a probationer in Indian Bank at a time when, after being an IIT dropout, not having a postgraduate degree and looking for jobs, I had to find jobs. Indian Bank gave me a job as a probationary officer. So every time I come back here, it's not a visit to Chennai, it is a kind of a pilgrimage. My parents lived here till they passed away. So that is an additional dimension. So thank you, Mr. Reddy, for giving me this opportunity to be here, to see old friends, to shake hands with people that I've known and admired for years. It is a privilege. I'm also delighted, given the value system on which you have erected your business and on which you propose to run the mutual fund, that I have, as an old mutual fund industry player, the opportunity to be here with you. My first non-bureaucratic job, when I left the bureaucracy and I had applied for study leave My study leave had been sanctioned, and I was looking forward to 2 years of relative peace and relaxation, which is what I was told study leave was about. I didn't know about it. And that is a time when the Unit Trust of India went under, and some of my well-wishers in Delhi said, this guy is having a good time. Maybe we should pull him out and send him there. That was my first job. So I started in the financial sector with India's oldest and largest mutual fund. I've seen all mutual funds thereafter at fairly close quarters. In fact, in the last 1 week, I have been advising one mutual fund on how to get their act together, and I'll come back to that in the context of what you said in your initial remarks. Interestingly, India's first private sector mutual fund was launched in this city. The Kotari Pioneer Fund was India's first private fund. All the funds that preceded it were public sector mutual funds, whether it was Unit Trust of India, decades ago, and thereafter the State Bank, the Canara Bank, and all of them, LIC, but the first was from here. So there is a strong base that this city has when it comes to mutual funds. But what I was delighted about was the fact that you said that you will, the next 5 years, have only 3 funds. This is not a statement that you will hear from most people in the mutual fund industry. They will tell you that we are thinking of 5 funds by next week. And one of the problems that I am grappling with as I am engaging with a mutual fund now at this point of time is to tell them that your total assets under management are so small. Why do you need 44 separate schemes, with some of them looking like other schemes, almost like they are unrecognizable? What kind of a game are you playing with the investors? And what you put up here, talking about empowering of investors, that I think is the basic principle of running the mutual fund industry. Because the problem in India is there are investable surpluses. There are people who are not educated investors. They do not know the various asset classes, what the risks and returns are, what gives you how much of liquidity, how much of returns, and how much of safety. These are the 3 principles that people who part with money look for. And in that context, to hear somebody say that I am looking to empower investors, because an empowered investor is an educated investor. It's only an educated investor who's an empowered investor. Otherwise, you may have any number of investment advisors. That is not going to convert the large population of investors that we have to taking the right decisions on their own. They need help, they need advice, they need, as you said rightly, empowerment. It's not about regulation, it's not about development. These are means to an end. The SEBI preamble talks about development, it talks about regulation, and it talks about protecting the interests of investors. And the way I choose to read it is that both development and regulation are means to an end, which is protection of the interests of investors. That is why regulatory organizations exist. So when you have a plethora of funds, when you have more and more complications in order to make the funds seem different from the others, when you cater to small elements of the population forgetting the interests of everyone else, then you are not playing fair by the investor population. And I think you have struck the right note in saying that you will keep them center stage when you take your decisions and go forward. You have a track record. We have, at last count, I think 42 or 43 funds. But your fund will have to be different. I know it will be different. Because all organizations in today's world have to live on trust. And that trust is premised on transparency and technology. If you don't have transparency and you don't have technology, you will not have trust. And from what I understand, you're already on the path of ensuring that there is much more transparency than is needed or is exhibited by others in the space. It's a very competitive space. It's a highly regulated space. And the problem with regulators, I'm often asked, what is a viewpoint as a regulator? I say in 78 years, I spent 3 years as a regulator, so I have other points of view in life. But the way regulators look at it is, and it's unfortunate but true, and I don't mind saying this, you operate from a position of distrust, that everyone who sets up a business is doing it to make a quick buck at somebody else's expense. That you are setting up an organization, undertaking commercial activity in order to produce goods and services that benefit the community and share in the prosperity of those persons for whom you produce those goods and services. This is something which is not registered with regulators worldwide, not just in India. So you look at everyone through the lens of suspicion. You think that if I take my eyes off, this guy is going to do something wrong. Now that is what people like you need to correct by demonstrating that in doing business honestly, doing it well, doing it transparently, you will also deliver whatever your stakeholder community needs from you. The other point that I wanted to share is this, that many people, every time a mutual fund fails, and we've had unfortunately a few failures, tend to tar the entire community of mutual funds with the same brush. They think somebody's been caught out, but the others must be doing the same thing. So that's the kind of environment in which you operate. And I'm sure that you will rise above that and demonstrate that that approach is not the right approach. People will immediately want to take out money. They don't know what asset classes suit their requirements. Today I am told you can't look at gold because the prices are high. Real estate in any case has question marks against it as an investment. So where do you go with the money? And if you put money in banks and factor in tax and inflation, you pay the tax, the bank doesn't pay you anything. Nominally you get an interest which doesn't cover tax and inflation. So in that environment, and with people not having the benefit of both understanding the risks, having the benefit of research, and the benefit of diversification which mutual funds provide, then they go and bark up the wrong trees, lose their life savings. So it is that space into which you have come. It is that space that you need to conquer, and I am sure you will. It is in that space that you need to set an example for the others to show that ethics and economics are not opposed to each other. Many people think they're antonyms, they are not. Ethics and economics can go together. And by example, you will be able to demonstrate that there is space for good people in the world of business and more particularly mutual funds. I was delighted to hear that over 24 years you've connected with such a large number of people, but here you will not get to directly interact with the guys that give the money into your funds. So what will be the bridge? The bridge will be your reputation. You can't shake hands with them, you don't know them. You don't know where they are. Maybe they represent a name and an identification number. But what will connect you with them is your reputation, is your commitment to honesty, integrity, correct practices. And I'm absolutely certain, gives me great pleasure to be associated with the dedication. You explained why dedication, and that is something which touched a chord in my heart. I've never heard this kind of things before. I've been around in a large number of business functions. I've never heard people use these words to explain the relationship with the stakeholder community. It is more transactional. You are talking about a relationship. You are talking about being one with them as you progress together. This is rare. It's music to my ears. And I think that in the years ahead, I will very closely watch what you're doing. somebody asked me this morning, so you're going there, a mutual fund is being not launched but getting started. So are you going to invest funds? I said that the government took care of, because the government has done a singular favor to a lot of us who were in government service for many years. They've left us without investable surpluses, and therefore we do not have to take the difficult decision of where to invest. Where to invest comes after what to invest. So the what is not there, the where doesn't come. But should life present me with those opportunities, you might see my account in one of your 3 funds. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
So we can't thank you enough for such an insightful and an emotional speech. It's incredible to know that you have spent some of your happiest days in this city of Chennai. Moving on, next we have the most awaited session for the evening. But before we dive in, I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Saravanan Vishwanathan, Chief Investment Officer, Unifi Mutual Fund, to introduce the keynote speaker for the day.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our esteemed keynote speaker for this special evening, Mr. Kishore Mahbubani. Mr. Kishore is widely considered to be one of world's leading geopolitical analysts and public policy intellectual. He has appeared several times in Foreign Policy magazine's list of top 100 global thinkers. In 2014, he was also listed by the Financial Times as one of the 50 individuals who would shape the debate on the future of capitalism. Perhaps the best summary of Mr. Kishore's contribution was made in the citation for the US Foreign Policy Association Medal he received in June 2004. A gifted diplomat, a student of history and philosophy, a provocative writer, and an intuitive thinker. Mr. Kishore has enjoyed 3 distinguished careers in diplomacy, academia, and writing and speaking. In diplomacy, he served in the Singapore Foreign Service for 33 years. He has also served 2 stints as Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations and has also been the president of the Security Council. In academia, he was the founding dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS, which is deemed to be the premier school in Asia in its field. He has spoken, written, and published in all corners of the world. He has authored 10 books so far. His book, The Asian 21st Century, an open access book, has been downloaded more than 3.8 million times. His most recent book, Living the Asian Century, an diplomatic memoir, has received great reviews throughout the world. His TED Talk has been viewed 2.2 million times. He has also been consistently receiving awards right from his teenage. In 1967, he was awarded the President's Scholarship. In 1998, he was conferred the Public Administration Gold Medal by the Singapore government. He was also given the 2003-2004 Dr. John Mayer's Global Citizenship Award by the Institute for Global Leadership at the Tufts University. In April 2019, he was the second Singaporean to be elected as an honorary international member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. What makes all these accomplishments truly special is the fact he had to overcome several odds, which includes poverty and undernutrition during his childhood. Ladies and gentlemen, and now invite Mr. Kishore Mahbubani to deliver the keynote address. Most welcome, sir.
Mr. Sharat Reddy, Mr. Damodaran, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin first of all by congratulating Unifi for this amazing moment. I lived 10 years of my life in New York City. I met lots of people in the financial sector. And if you had asked me, where would you find the best treasure trove of values in New York City, I would have said, don't go to Wall Street. And it's actually quite amazing that Unifi is succeeding on the basis of its values. I was really, really impressed by what you said, Mr. Reddy. So a special round of applause for Mr. Reddy and Unifi. At the same time, I can tell you that Mr. Reddy has given me an impossible mission. He said, can you try to explain our world to us? And as you know, we live in extremely confusing times. And by the way, if you're not confused, something is wrong with you. Because so much is happening, so much is changing. And when future historians look at our time, they will see that we went through a remarkable process of change. We are clearly leaving a historical era and marching into a new one, which is very different from what we have experienced in the last 200 years. So in my remarks today, what I propose to do, I'll divide my remarks into three parts. Firstly, I want to try and tell you about what exactly are the key changes happening in our world underneath all the noise. And then I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about China, which is the new large actor on the world stage, which is going to, in one way or another, whose emergence is going to shake the world. And then I'm going to talk about the implications for India to the best of my knowledge. And I believe I'll speak to you for about 30 minutes, and there'll be a Q&A session. I only have one request for you when we come to the Q&A session. Please think of the most difficult questions. I find the more difficult the question, the easier to answer. The easier the question, the harder to answer. So I hope you will challenge me, because it's important for you to challenge me, because I can assure you that we're going to enter into a world of many surprises, and we must challenge all the assumptions that we have. Now, coming to part one, in terms of the world that we are going to see emerging, the way I describe the new world that is emerging, I describe it as a 3M world. 3M doesn't stand for the company in Minnesota, by the way. 3M stands for multi-civilizational, multipolar, and multilateral. And I'll try to explain what these three terms mean. The reason I begin with multi-civilizational is that it is an undeniable reality that world history was in one way or another dominated by one civilization for the last 200 years. It was the West that ran the world effortlessly. And if you think about it, if you had been here in Chennai 100 years ago, in 1925, what you would have seen is 100,000 Englishmen effortlessly ruling over 300 million Indians then. And to me, as an Indian, I find that quite surprising. How did 300 million of my ancestors allow themselves to be ruled effortlessly by 100,000 Englishmen? Isn't that amazing? But that was the past. And that world is gone. And as I will explain later, one would have assumed that the most successful civilization so far would have the easiest time bridging into the new world. Actually, it's the West that's struggling, and it's the West that's creating and generating a lot of problems for us. So in a very strange way, the most competent civilization, as I'll give with examples later, is becoming incompetent. And it's the new civilizations, the new societies that are becoming stronger and more effective. At the same time, the world is also becoming multipolar. And it's becoming multipolar in the sense that we've had a world actually, especially since the end of the Cold War in 1990 or so, we transitioned from a bipolar world to a unipolar world. And clearly the United States was way ahead, far stronger than any other power. But that unipolar moment was a brief moment in world history, and now we're transitioning to a multipolar world with other great powers emerging. And by the way, some of these power shifts are happening incredibly fast and completely transforming the world. Maybe I should give you a few statistics so you understand what I mean about these dramatic power shifts. I spoke earlier about how Europe used to run the world effortlessly. Now I can tell you, as recently as 1980, the combined GNP of the European Union countries was 10 times bigger than China in 1980, right? Today, China and the European Union are about the same size. By 2050, the European Union will be half the size of China. Just imagine that. How does a continent go from being 10 times the size of China to becoming the same size and to becoming half the size? Now, these dramatic transformations are happening across many areas. As you know, I come from Singapore, I live in Southeast Asia, and that's a part of the world that is actually doing remarkably well. In the year 2000, Japan was the second largest economy in the world. Japan was 8 times bigger than ASEAN or Southeast Asia. Today, Japan is 1.3 times bigger. By 2030, ASEAN is bigger than Japan. Another dramatic transformation. And there are other examples. Of course, India is part of the changes too. In the year 2000, India wasn't among the top 10 economies in the world. UK was among the top 5. Today, India is top 5. UK is not in the top 5. You'll soon become number 3 by 2030, and UK will drop out the top 10. Which is why I've suggested that the British should very nicely give up their permanent seat in the Security Council to India. It's the least they can do for having, ruled India for so long. So, and actually, I did, to my absolute surprise, the Financial Times published a column by me accepting my suggestion that the British should give up their seat. But I can assure you that the British will never give up their seat. They will cling on to the privileges of the past. And this is an appropriate point for me to transition to explain to you why the West is mishandling this transition to this new world order. And I can tell you that the reluctance of the West to accept these changes is one of the strongest reasons why we're experiencing a lot of turbulence. And let me start with Europe first. Because, what's shocking, as I mentioned, 100 years ago, the British could run India, but frankly, the Europeans were running the world, everywhere, every corner, Africa, South America, Asia, all colonized by European powers. And you would assume that the Europeans, being so sophisticated, so smart, so geopolitically savvy, wouldn't make basic mistakes in geopolitics. But it's the Europeans, as you know, who are the most anguished, the most depressed, the most worried people on planet Earth today, because they made some huge geopolitical mistakes. And you see this in the Ukraine war. Now, let me emphasize very clearly that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is illegal. International law is very clear on that. You cannot endorse that invasion. But at the same time, if you have even the minimal level of geopolitical common sense, you would say that this conflict could have been easily avoided. It is the most avoidable conflict in human history in some ways, because all that the Europeans had to do to prevent the Ukraine war from happening was to not support the expansion of NATO, not just into the former Eastern Europe, but to support the expansion of NATO into the former territories of the Soviet Union. And all kinds of warnings were issued. In fact, one of the greatest geopolitical thinkers the Americans had was George Kennan, who formulated America's containment strategy. And George Kennan said, "Why are you doing this? You're going to infuriate the Russians. You're going to get them angry. And they'll react, and then you blame them for reacting." So, you can't, on the one hand, push the Russians into a corner, and then when they react, you say, "Oh, why? Why are they so reacting?" Who pushed them into the corner? The Europeans did. Foolishly, stupidly. And they were also warned by Henry Kissinger. They were also warned by a former American ambassador to Moscow, Bill Burns, who was director of CIA under Joe Biden. And he sent a report from Moscow saying, trying to push for Ukraine to get into NATO, you're crossing the reddest of all red lines of Moscow. Ukraine is very much a part of the Russian soul. How can you push Ukraine into NATO? Right? But all these warnings were ignored, and the Europeans, as you know, endorsed a joint statement between US and EU, pushed by George W. Bush and the neocons, saying that Ukraine and Georgia should be admitted to NATO. I can tell you, when I heard that in 2008, I said, trouble is coming. You could see it coming. And why didn't the Europeans see this? This is very, very puzzling. They should have seen it coming, and they should have stopped it. But they didn't. And now they are suffering the consequences. And what's remarkable is that the Europeans who are supposed to be geopolitically so savvy made another fundamental mistake. One of the oldest rules of geopolitics, which is pure common sense. Never put all your geopolitical eggs in one basket. You must hedge. Guess what? They put all their geopolitical eggs into Donald Trump. How can you do that? Why didn't you diversify? Why didn't you find other ways and means of doing it? They didn't do it. Of course, they assumed that the United States would always be supporting them, would always stand with them. And here, having spoken about values, I can tell you that values work in many areas, but they don't work in geopolitics. Geopolitics is only about interests, and never about values. And so when the interests converge, the countries work together. When the interests diverge, they don't work together. And of course, the Europeans didn't see at all what was transforming the United States of America. So let me here transition into a much more interesting topic, Donald Trump. I can tell you that for a man who's so open, who talks so much and who tweets so much, you would think he's so open you can understand him very easily. You can't. Amazingly, in his own way, he's quite a complex character. But as I speak about Donald Trump, one word of warning: don't believe a word about what the New York Times says about him. The New York Times hates him, despises him, and as a result, they don't understand him. And they don't understand what brought him back into power a second time. I can tell you, to be honest with you, I also got seduced by the New York Times, and I thought this guy is a crazy guy. After he left office in 2020, I thought he could never be re-elected. And if someone had told me in 2020 that Donald Trump will come back as one of the most consequential presidents in American history, I would have said, no way. It happened. You know, it's actually quite shocking to watch how he came back so strongly. And what's amazing is all these sophisticated liberal minds in America have never tried to understand why did the people vote for Donald Trump. And there are structural reasons why they voted for Donald Trump. And one of the most important structural reasons is that over the last 20, 30 years, as the United States was promoting and supporting globalization, and by the way, that was good for the world, the United States elites didn't see that the working classes in the United States were suffering as a result of globalization. In fact, the United States is the only country where the bottom 50% have not seen any improvement in their standard of living for 30 years. And the United States is the only modern developed country which is seeing its life expectancy go down. Now, these are very powerful signals that something is going wrong fundamentally in the society. The people were crying out and said, "You're not taking care of me." The liberals didn't hear them at all. Instead, Donald Trump heard their voices, Donald Trump heard their anger, and as you know now, he's leading this crusade against globalization, leading this tariffs war, and so on and so forth. So clearly, Donald Trump has emerged because he has a capacity to listen to the people in a way that the liberals didn't. Of course, the big question is, what will be the final impact of Donald Trump after his 4 years? And I can tell you, it's still too early to tell. Because on some fronts, he will be positive. What is strange about Donald Trump is that, he's not a man you would associate with good values. I mean, I know some businessmen who work with him, and they say they never do business with Donald Trump. They will happily do business with Unifi, but not with Donald Trump. But at the same time, he's not that crazy. I can tell you, I have a friend of mine who's actually a good friend of Donald Trump, and this friend of mine, I'll call him Richard, one day visited Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. He liked Mar-a-Lago, and then as he was leaving, he said, "Donald, I love this club of yours. Can I join? How much?" So Donald Trump said, $400,000. So my Richard said, "Come on, Donald, you and I know this is not worth $400,000. This club is worth $50,000. But never mind, never mind. Richard said, I'll sign you a check. I'll put Donald to Donald Trump. I'll leave the amount blank and I'll sign. You put in the amount and I'll join. So you know what's the amount Donald Trump put in the check? $1 million. But then a week later, Donald Trump frantically calls Richard and said, Richard, I wanted to put a sum on the check that I knew would bounce. And then I would say, your check bounced. He said, your check didn't bounce. Amazing. But I said, don't worry. Donald told Richard, don't worry. I'll send you back $950,000. Right? So you only pay $50,000. But. Please send me your check after it is cleared. I want to show everyone you paid $1 million. So it shows you that Donald Trump actually has got a sense of humor, you know. He is able to deal with people. And I say this because the New York Times and other papers demonize him so much, they don't realize that if you demonize someone so much, you don't understand him. And he's got some positive instincts. So Donald Trump, fortunately for us, doesn't like wars, you know. And that's a wonderful thing. He's doing his best to try and stop the Ukraine war. And the Europeans don't seem to realize that it's in their interest to stop the Ukraine war. The Europeans are trying to undermine Donald Trump as he's trying to stop the Ukraine war. That's another example of stupidity on their part, absolute stupidity. But that's, this is a classic case where Donald Trump is trying to do the right thing and the Europeans, unfortunately, are trying to undermine him. I hope he succeeds. And by the way, last year, as you know, the most tragic thing that happened last year was the fighting in Gaza. What Hamas did was wrong and evil. But to watch all the innocent Palestinian civilians suffering was so painful. Joe Biden couldn't stop it. Donald Trump stopped it. That's amazing. A guy without values saved so many Palestinian lives. So you can see, therefore, in some areas, he's clearly doing a positive thing. But I can tell you, in the area of tariffs, I'm afraid that he is going to do a lot of damage. These tariff wars are going to hurt a lot of countries. And unfortunately, maybe India too, because he's asked for reciprocity from India on tariffs, and that goes against established WTO rules, whereby developing countries are allowed to maintain high tariffs, developed countries have low tariffs. Donald Trump has thrown that out, and that's going to be painful. So you will see a lot of turbulence on that front. But let me switch now to another country which I think will play an equally important role in the world over the next 10 to 20 years, probably as significant as the role of that of the United States, and that is China. Now, I'm actually acutely aware that there is a lot of anti-China sentiment in India. But what I want to share with you is hopefully the Southeast Asian perspective on China. Because, Southeast Asia is much closer to China, has lived with China for 2,000 years, and has had a certain understanding of it. And from the Southeast Asian point of view, what China has accomplished, especially since they launched their 4 modernizations program 46 years ago in 1979, is something quite remarkable. And there are at least 2 or 3 remarkable accomplishments on the part of China. The first, of course, is that it has grown its economy dramatically. I gave you the example of vis-a-vis Europe. Europe was 8 times bigger, now same size, will be half the size. But even vis-a-vis the United States, in the year 2000, United States was 8 times bigger than China. Now it's 1.5 times bigger. So clearly, the Chinese have grown their economy remarkably. And the what's amazing is that before Deng Xiaoping came along, the Chinese economy was a closed economy, communist economy, completely closed. Deng Xiaoping came along and said, we open up. And they literally plunged into the ocean of globalization, took a lot of risks, and ended up with a spectacular transformation. But of all the statistics that I have seen about China's transformation, this is the most remarkable statistic, which I think everyone in the world should know. In the year 2000, China's share of global manufacturing was 5%, right? Germany, a much smaller country, share of global manufacturing was 8%. Germany's population, 80 million, China 1.4 billion, 15 times bigger, right? So Germany 8%, China 5%. By 2030, Germany's share is going to go down from 8% to 3%. China's share is going to grow from 5% to 45%. When one country has 45% of global manufacturing, it becomes a completely indispensable country to every manufacturer in the world. And I suspect if you go home and open up every product you have in your home, you'd be surprised to find that there's a bit of China in that. And that reflects the exact opposite of the Europeans. The Europeans had no geopolitical acumen. The Chinese have this amazing geopolitical acumen saying, we will make ourselves indispensable to the world. And the second remarkable thing about China's emergence is that China today, in the year 2025, is where the United States was in the 1890s, a new power that's emerging with new muscles. In the 1890s, when the United States emerged as a great power, what did it do? It declared war on other countries, it declared war on Spain, it conquered Philippines, conquered Cuba, conquered Guam, seized territories. Most great powers, as they emerge, as they get more powerful, they launch wars, conquer territories. China may be one of the few great powers that has emerged to become the second largest great power in the world without having fought a war in 46 years. According to the track record of history, this is very, very unusual. Very few great powers have emerged in the way that China has done so. And the third remarkable thing about China's accomplishment is that it has worked very hard to link itself up with every corner in the world. Because the Chinese anticipated 20 years ago that at some point in time, the United States would launch a containment policy against China. So to preempt, and a preemptive strike against containment policy, China made the rest of the world dependent on trading with China. And I'll give you two examples. One is, of course, ASEAN. In the year 2000, China proposed a free trade agreement with ASEAN. In the year 2000, United States trade with ASEAN was 135 billion. China's trade with ASEAN was only 40 billion. US 135, China 40. By 2022, US had increased its trade from 135 billion to 500 billion. China had increased its trade with ASEAN from 40 billion to almost 1 trillion. 25 times increase in 20 years. That's amazing. And then you take Brazil, which is so far away from China. In the year 2000, it took Brazil 1 year to export $1 billion to China. Today, it takes Brazil 60 hours to export $1 billion to China. So what it has done, therefore, China, is created this tremendous dependence on China to forestall any containment policy. So what it shows, therefore, there is within China the exact opposite of the Europeans, a capacity to think long-term, capacity to think where we want to be 20 years from now, and how do we get there. That's their competitive advantage that they have. So finally, I've exceeded my time. What are the implications for India? And I actually do believe that as the world order transforms itself, there'll be winners, there'll be losers. But India will be one of the biggest winners in this new world order. Why? Let me go back to my 3M world. Multi-civilizational, multipolar, and multilateral. 1, multi-civilizational. There are very few deep and rich civilizations in our world, but one of the most shining civilizations in our world is India's civilization. And I can tell you, the world will fall in love with India as it gets to know India better and its rich heritage. So there's so much to discover here. And as the role of the West has had, in a sense, had this incredibly bright light shining on the world. You didn't see the other civilizations, but the other civilizations will emerge, and India will be one of them. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Jaipur attending the Jaipur Literature Festival to talk about my memoirs, Living the Asian Century. I heard a fascinating speech by William Dalrymple pointing out that if you look back at history, India has had an enormous impact on many parts of the world in ways that have been underappreciated. But that underappreciation will go, and the world will once again rediscover India. And then you have multipolar. And clearly in a multipolar world, especially after India becomes the third largest economy in the world, India will be a strong independent pole in a multipolar world. And I can tell you that countries in the global south especially, who make up 88% of the world's population, will be looking to India as a natural leader to guide it as we go into a different world that is emerging. And finally, in the multilateral dimension, you can see that India is playing a bigger and bigger role in all kinds of new multilateral organizations that are developing. India successfully hosted the G20 meeting here. And so in many new multilateral organizations, what I've discovered as an ambassador to the UN for over 10 years is that even in multilateral organizations, you need strong leadership, because without leadership, you don't succeed. One of the few countries that enjoys the trust of all the major powers in the world is India. And so that gives India a tremendous opportunity to provide leadership in the world that's coming. So I remain very bullish and optimistic for India's role in this coming world. And so why don't I stop here and respond to your questions. Thank you very much.
As we prepare the stage, I invite Mr. Baidik Sarkar, Head of Research, Unifi Capital, to moderate the Q&A session. Thank you so much, sir.
Check, check, check.
We have the mics circulating all around the room. I hope you will have some of the easiest questions. So,
Check, check. Check, check.
Check. Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was a truly masterful and delightful deconstruction of the state of the world that we are in today, right? In fact, this was not a part of my script, but, I was chatting with a few investors earlier today, and I think 8 out of 10 were bemoaning the state of our returns and the state of the Indian markets. And I said, look, there's this thing called geopolitics. There is this thing called the trade tensions. We might have to be cognizant of that. And trust me, Ambassador, all the 10 of them just wished me away. They said, don't make excuses. So, ladies and gentlemen, the next time we write to you about the state of geopolitics, it's not us, it's not Unifi. You've heard it from the maestro, right? So just keep that in perspective. But, before we get started and before we open up the house for Q&A, Ambassador, with your permission, could we start today's conversation with something light, right? Over the last 40 years that you've been a career diplomat, I know for a fact that you've been privy to certain path-breaking moments. But what, in your opinion, has probably been the most undiplomatic event, the most undiplomatic state of affairs that you might be privy to, things that are so bad that we don't get to read about them? Yeah.
Well, is this working? Yes, okay. Unfortunately, you all might think that I'm becoming very anti-European, but unfortunately, it's a true story. When I was the permanent secretary of the Foreign Ministry of Singapore, I led the Singapore Senior Officials Delegation. And so all of us, the ASEAN permanent secretaries, were invited to go to Europe, I think to Luxembourg, for a meeting with our European counterparts, my European permanent secretaries. And of course, when you arrive at a conference, what they do is they host you to lunch. And the leader of the ASEAN delegation was a distinguished Malaysian diplomat, Tan Sri Kamil Jaafar. Now, we were all told that you have to bring your invitation cards for the lunch, right? But as we walk into the hall, the Luxembourg host is standing down there to receive the leader of the Malaysian delegation, the leader of the ASEAN delegation. And as the leader of the Malaysian delegation walks in, they asked him for his card. He said, well, I didn't bring my card. I'm the guest of honor. I'm the, And he pointed out to the host. He's standing there, He knows me. And you know what they did? They refused to let him in without the card. How can you not let the guest of honor in just because he doesn't have his card? And that to me showed to me the absolute stupidity and arrogance of the Europeans. They didn't realize that this world has changed. And but ASEAN paid back the European Union, ASEAN gave European Union the biggest slap in the face they ever had. Because I can tell you one statistic that will shock you. ASEAN's combined GNP is about 3.5 trillion. About 1/5 of that of the European Union, 17 trillion, right? You know what? In the decade 2010 to 2020, ASEAN contributed more to global economic growth than the European Union did. You see, you don't invite us for lunch, we'll grow faster than you.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's bring it on. Let's open the house for Q&A. You know for a fact that the degree of separation between you and the gentleman here and Donald Trump is just 2, right? So let's make this count, and we'll look forward to your profound questions. Over to you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, with multiple questions. I think one gentleman already has a mic. Yes, sir, yeah. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting speech. I'm here. Yeah. I was listening to I was looking at a video by Sharat Damodaran earlier today, and he remarked that the genie of globalization cannot be put back into the bottle. Trump's term is only for 4 years, and the anti-globalization movements and moves that he is making do you think they'll be contained in time and space, that is within the United States and for the next few years? Or do you think this is a trend that's going to catch on with the rest of the world and go on for a longer time?
Well, I share the point of view that the genie of globalization cannot be put back into the bottle. And by the way, even though Donald Trump, he's not trying to completely reject globalization. But what he's trying to do is, let's have a level playing field. If you want zero tariffs from the United States, you give me zero tariffs too. So he's not saying we stop all trade. He's saying we trade on the same basis. And more importantly, the rest of the world, remember at the end of the day, there are 8 billion people in the world and only 330 million Americans, right? They make up less than 5% of the world's population. And most of the rest of the world, including the Europeans, are still proceeding with globalization. And in East Asia, I can tell you, in East Asia, there's absolutely no walking back from globalization, because we have done spectacularly well as a result of globalization. ASEAN has grown dramatically, mainly because of globalization. So I don't see the rest of the world walking away from it. And eventually, when the United States finds that it needs the rest of the world for some areas too, you will see some degree of backtracking. So I don't in any way forecast the death of globalization.
Sure. I think there was a gentleman in the middle. Yes, sir.
Thank you for a very informative talk. You had mentioned
Well, globalization can't solve for this, the mics.
I think I'm loud enough. You had mentioned that the average life expectancy in the United States is coming down. Now, for a country where 17% of the GDP is on healthcare, US does not rank even among the top 20 countries of the world with reference to healthcare. Now, do you think that the health of a population is as important as the health of mutual funds? In other words, the economic prosperity of a country, how much importance would you give for the health of a nation? And do you think that India is going in the right line so far as universal health coverage is concerned? People working in the health arena, it's not being, really feel that the day is not too far off when the world will try to achieve India class in healthcare. India is no longer talking about attempting to reach world class in healthcare. India is a paradox. We have, of course, the poor, the poorest of the poor, but today no Indian has to leave India for any treatment anywhere. Your comments on the health of a population in the future?
Well, I think that's a very, very good point. I mean, the paradox about the United States is that it spends the highest percentage of GNP on healthcare. 17%. I think Singapore spends 3%. But we get much better health outcomes in Singapore with 3% than the United States gets with 17%. But at the same time, the paradox is that, for the people at the bottom 50% in America who haven't seen an improvement in their living standards, they are suffering in terms of healthcare. But the elites in America are getting the best healthcare in the world. And I can tell you, if any of you have any really remarkable, difficult, dangerous medical condition, you have to fly to the United States. Because their R&D in these fields are absolutely remarkable. So the United States is still a world leader in terms of healthcare technology. And not just, not just on the medical front, but also using IT and what it can do with IT and medical care. They're doing quite remarkable things. So I would say that whatever you do, never underestimate the United States of America. It's a remarkable country that has had remarkable achievements. And you can see that, so far, the Americans managed to send a man to the moon in 1969. and nobody has duplicated that, even though, a tremendous amount of time has passed. So in many areas, while United States is underperforming in some areas, it is super performing in other areas. That's the paradox of the United States.
Yeah, I think we have one on the left. That's Aegis. Go ahead.
Hi, Ambassador. Thank you for a scintillating session. Ambassador, I have two questions. The first one is on India and China. And if you were to draw a triangle and put macro stability at one end and ROE at the other and scale at the other, China has really focused on scale and macro stability, whereas India is on ROE and macro stability. So the journey we are traversing is very different from that of China. So I'd love to know your thoughts on the same. And the second question is that, as we live in a VUCA world with, several countries growing stronger, they're all seeking to assert their own economic and political influence. So how do we deal with the increase in trade and economic conflicts as different nations pursue conflicting interests? Right.
Yeah. The first one was
so
macro stability.
So it was a macro question, but if I could just deconstruct that for you, Ambassador. I think what our guest is trying to understand is there any other economy in the world that can manage to bridge the scale that China has? Is it even a technical possibility? For instance, you mentioned the fact about Brazil, right? It took them 20 years, to go from a year to 60 hours and a billion, right? Now, if India were to endeavor to compete with China on scale, are we socially, culturally prepared? Is any other country even remotely close to replicating China in terms of scale?
Well, I'm very bullish on the Indian economy. I think India will eventually get to where China is. But the only question is the speed. Are you going to decide to grow at 4 to 5%, or are you going to try and grow at 8 to 9%? Chinese, as you know, grew at 8, 9% for decades. And they did a remarkable job. And here, I think it's interesting to me that very few Indians ask themselves the question, how did China grow so fast? And one of the reasons why China grew so fast, actually the reason was given by the president of China, President Xi Jinping, when he spoke in Davos in January 2017. And I was in the room in Davos when he spoke about China. And he said China was growing very slowly. He said, finally we decided that we had to plunge, this is the words of Xi Jinping, we had to plunge into the ocean of globalization. And when we plunged into the ocean, we struggled to swim, we drank water, we were struggling. But after a while, we became stronger. And as a result of succeeding in the ocean of globalization, China's economy grew. And what's remarkable is that, as you know, China is politically very much a closed society, but their economy is incredibly integrated with the rest of the world. China trades more with the rest of the world than the United States does, for example. And that's a result of a conscious decision. And I know that there is some hesitation in India about globalization. I can tell you that the Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN countries, were very keen to see India join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. I don't know whether you've heard of this, our Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It's the world's largest free trade agreement, And it includes the 10 ASEAN countries who proposed the RCEP, includes Australia, New Zealand, includes Japan, South Korea, China, and we wanted India to join. But India decided not to join. Because I can tell you that if you ask the professional economists who do their econometric studies, they will show you that India will benefit from joining RCEP. Now, of course, as you know, when you join a free trade agreement, there will be creative destruction. Some industries will suffer. That's a natural thing to do. But what it does is that it removes your uncompetitive industries and makes your competitive industries much stronger. And that's why the ASEAN countries have been growing so fast, because they have been opening themselves up to globalization. And I think India can also decide at some point in time to plunge into the ocean of globalization, to struggle to swim, to drink water, but then after a while it'll become much stronger. So I feel that would say, so India is the country that has tremendous potential to grow much faster than it has so far.
Sure. And if I may just rehash the second question, which was on volatility and uncertainty, right? So very, very simplistically, how does this end in Russia?
Well, I think, by the way, living with uncertainty, uncertainty is a fact of life. I mean, when they call this the VUCA world, what is this? Volatile, uncertain, whatever it is. That's the nature of the times we live in. But you must also remember that in human terms, if you're a human being and you want to choose at what point in history to be born, you would choose today, right? 100 years ago, when 100,000 British Englishmen were effortlessly ruling India, they were dying in their 40s and 50s. Life expectancy was 50 or 60. Today, life expectancy, even for the poor, can hit 70 or 80, right? So clearly, we have done something remarkable about the human condition, and the number of people who have been rescued from poverty is billions of people have been rescued from poverty. You mentioned that when I grew up as a child, when I was introduced, certainly I was undernourished. I was put on a special feeding program. I had to go to the principal's office, and there was one pail of milk for 12 boys, and they say all the 12 boys drank from the same ladle of milk to get, to overcome our undernourishment and share our germs with each other. But as you can see now, I'm overnourished. So clearly, the human condition today is much better than it has ever been in human history. I mean, if I look back at sort of my ancestors, how many of them would have enjoyed the kind of life that I've had, the kind of education, the exposure, and so on and so forth. The opportunities that we have today as human beings are much better than we have had ever in the past.
Certainly. I think the next question is a written one, and I think he or she is probably a Narendra Modi supporter, but it's a smart thing not to identify yourself, so yeah, a smart one on that. So the question, Ambassador, is, and I quote, how much of India's credit of its recent success can be attributable to the Modi government?
Well, I can say very confidently that if you want to have economic growth, you must have political stability. If you don't have political stability, it's very hard to grow economically, because you can't make the decisions that will have long-term benefits. You can't assure the foreign investors that there will be stability in the country. And certainly, I can tell you, in the case of Singapore, the reason why Singapore gets a lot of foreign investment is because we have a very high degree of political stability. In fact, by the way, Singapore has received more foreign investment than China, Japan, South Korea combined. Even though China, Japan, South Korea combined are much bigger economies, which is a remarkable statistic. And what's the reason for that? Political stability. So I would say that political stability in India is a critical factor if you want to make all the various kinds of transitions that you have to make, if you want to carry out your economic reforms, like removing all your... I mean, I was surprised to learn that in the old days, a truck going from Calcutta to Mumbai wouldn't go straight across the country. It would detour depending on how much VAT it had to pay, right? So things like that had to be transformed, and things like that require very strong government. So that's what I think you need to succeed in economic reform.
Sure. And the second question, I think, is a rather fearful question, which is, do you have an outsider's perspective on, I quote, this is not my question, on Rahul Gandhi? What if he runs India tomorrow? Do you have an outsider's perspective?
Well, I have a simple rule since I'm a Singapore citizen. I never interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. No, but this is a very good rule to have, by the way. It's best for us. I mean, this is another mistake that people in the West used to make. They used to pass judgments on other countries and say, why don't you have more democracy? Why are you imprisoning your citizens? Why are you doing all that, And, I remember as an ambassador to the UN, I would get lots of lectures from Americans. Oh, Singapore is practicing torture and so on and so forth. So to me, it was a big shock when the countries that lectured against torture, United States became the first modern developed country to reintroduce torture in Guantanamo Bay. So, and this to me was a shock. The people in the West like to give lectures, but whenever they have problems, they forget what they said and they go back, they replicate what other countries do too. And the Europeans actually also participated in the torture of people by allowing what they call rendition centers for these things. So the hypocrisy of countries when they pass judgment on other countries is terrible. So it's best that we all say, you take care of your house, I take care of my house.
Well, so that was a very diplomatic answer on Rahul Gandhi, by the way. So, yes, sir. Can somebody please help the gentleman with the mic? Yeah. Yeah, I think we're on with that. Yeah.
I think I got it. Sir, I have two questions. One is, the first one is, are the Americans likely to withdraw their support for Taiwan? Is it likely to happen? And if it does, will Taiwan survive as a country, separate country? My second question is, I know it might sound a little trivial, but this comes out of an analysis I read a few years ago. Talking about the difference between India and China, interestingly, Confucius lived about 2,500 years ago in China, and he was just a civil servant. But over the years, he became a legend, and his spirit survives even today. In fact, he's created an atmosphere of a work ethic that is unparalleled. In fact, now we talk about 996 in China. Of course, I don't advocate that, but I'm just stating the fact. And going back to 2,500 years ago, the Indian caste system started around the same time. In fact, over the years, the caste system, instead of disappearing, it had become stronger and stronger for various reasons, as you know. And if there is a single inhibiting factor preventing India from reaching the size of China, I believe it is this, the caste system. Would you agree with that?
Okay, your first question was on Taiwan.
Taiwan, yeah.
Second question on the caste system. Well, on Taiwan, it's important to understand that Taiwan is a very sensitive issue for China. If there's one issue that China will go to war over, it's over Taiwan. Because the Chinese believe that Taiwan was historically part of China. It was historically part of China. And it was first separated during China's century of humiliation. By the way, if you ever want to understand China, you must understand these three words, century of humiliation. The Chinese, as a result of the century of humiliation from 1842 to 1949, and by the way, if you want to understand the century of humiliation, I've actually prepared a free edX course, EDX course, you can see on the century of humiliation. And so it's important for China that Taiwan never declares independence. So if Taiwan stays as it is, maintains the status quo, there'll be no war. But if Taiwan declares independence, then there'll be war. And United States, by the way, has been very responsible for most of the time. And the United States has said, Taiwan, you cannot declare independence. We won't support you. And that's been the American position. And as long as that's the American position, then I think there won't be a war over Taiwan. And I don't think that China is are going to invade Taiwan anytime soon, because the Chinese believe that the best way to win a war is to not fight it. This is Sun Tzu, another thinker from 2,000 years ago. And eventually, over time, Taiwan will fall into the lap of China as China becomes more and more powerful. China doesn't need to conquer Taiwan. Now, your second question about China's ancient wisdom 2,500 years ago. In fact, what's remarkable about China is that it's the world's oldest continuous civilization. And the thing about the Chinese is that even Mao Zedong tried his best to squash and kill Confucius. As you know, Confucius has come back. And now the same Communist Party of Mao Zedong is celebrating Confucius. So it shows you the power of these things. Now, one thing I should emphasize to you all is that China is a very complex society. You get simplified black and white views of China that are not true, especially in the Western media. And in the case of the Chinese, there are many reasons why the Chinese worker is exceptionally productive, by the way. But one of the reasons is that during the Cultural Revolution destroyed a lot of the whatever remnants of the caste system there was in China. And a sense of equality among the Chinese people became much stronger after the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. Now, the Cultural Revolution was terrible. Okay, lots of people died in the Cultural Revolution. But it also transformed Chinese society. And it got rid of all the feudal strains of Chinese society. And that's what's making Chinese society today very strong and very resilient. Now, I can't comment on India's caste system. I'm told that it's eroding, but I can't say more than that. Yeah.
On a lighter note, sir, I'm very glad we don't have a symbol of the rupee on the stage. Otherwise, there might have been multipolarity in the room. Yeah, sorry, there's a gentleman in the middle. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent talk. Yeah, can you see me here?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thank you for that excellent talk and excellent insights, Ambassador. I'm right here. My question is also on China. In the context of the role that China is likely to play, as you've elucidated today, can you comment on their demographics? How much of a problem is it, and how is that likely to play out?
Oh, there will be, I can confidently tell you that by 2050 and 2100, there'll be many more Indians than there'll be Chinese. Because China has peaked already in terms of its population, and its population is not growing anymore. It'll start to decline, it's begun to decline. But the Chinese, as I mentioned earlier, if there's one government that's always thinking 10 to 20 years down the road, it is China. And so, even though there are 1 in 6 people in the world is Chinese, 1 in 3 robots in the world is Chinese. 1 in 2 baby robots being born every day is Chinese. So in anticipation of a labor shortage, the Chinese have created this incredible investment in the future. And when I go visit factories in China, what is stunning is that you can walk for 200 meters, see this incredible number of machines working away, and you know what? You don't see a single human being. So the demographic decline of China has been anticipated, and they're working to get around it.
Yeah, sure. There is a gentleman behind you, sir, if I may request you first, and then we'll come back to you, sir. Yeah. Please go ahead, sir.
Good evening, sir. Throughout history, we've seen that whenever there is a hegemon and a rising power challenges that hegemon, there's been war or there's been some kind of conflict. You spoke of the containment that the West is doing today to China. We in India believe that we are also a rising power. Of course, we have a way to go. but we are a rising power. How inevitable is a conflict between China and India?
Between China and India?
Yes.
Well, I think, the one lesson of history is that conflicts can be avoided. Conflicts are not inevitable. It's a question of how you manage these things. And fortunately, we live in a world where, by and large, wars are becoming a sunset industry. That's a fact. And by the way, since I've been so critical of the Europeans, let me tell you that the Europeans have achieved something which is the peak of human civilization. What the Europeans have achieved within the European Union, inside the European Union, you don't just have 0 wars between any 2 European Union states. France and Germany are not going to war with each other. UK and France are not going to war with each other. By the way, even though they fought so many times, today, the prospect of war is 0. 0. Can you imagine a world where the prospect of war within India and Pakistan? 0. Where the prospect of war within India and China? 0. That's the peak of human civilization. And I think we can achieve it. And here I can say Southeast Asia, if there's one of the biggest achievements of Southeast Asia, is that Southeast Asia is by far the most diverse corner of planet Earth. There are close to 700 million people in Southeast Asia. There are 250 million Muslims, 150 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, Hinayana Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists. We have Taoists, we have Confucianists, we have Hindus, and we have lots of communists also in Southeast Asia. And you know what? The most diverse corner of planet Earth hasn't seen a major war for almost 50 years. That's a huge success story. And that's why we think we in Southeast Asia can teach some lessons to the rest of the world on how you create a world without wars. Both the European Union and ASEAN can teach the world.
I think Major Indrabalan had a question.
Good evening, Mr. Mahbubani. Thank you so much for such insightful views. I'm going to respond to your demand of posing a difficult question, since you said that. So I take on from what this gentleman said about wars and your response that there will be no wars. So I agree with you that there will be no conventional wars. But if that be so, we'll go into the realm of technology. We have the deep space where the GPS has changed the lives the way GPS, Global Positioning System, has changed our lives. Baidu, Galileo, GLONASS, and even India's navigation doing the catching up game. The space is already dominated by Americans. You have the deep state, you have the deep fake, you have the dark web, and you have the deep seek. How all this is going to now pan out in a multipolar world, which is so far kept safe by US dominance, and if US is going to look internally, and we let loose, unleash these powerful tools in the hands of deep state and non-state actors, what is it going to do to the world geopolitics and power structures?
Yeah, just to add, so both the questions that we've received is on AI. So AI is literally all over the rule. Yeah. So over to you, Ambassador.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. I mean, modern technology does pose challenges. And it's very important that in the field of AI, for example, that we don't allow, for example, the obvious thing is we mustn't allow AI to decide whether or not to launch a nuclear weapon. Because, as you know, if a nuclear war starts, we are all toast, by the way. We're all dead. It doesn't matter where you are, because if the Russians launch 3,000 missiles towards the United States, and the United States launch 3,000 missiles towards Russia, our planet is gone, okay? It's not just the Russians and Americans. So we got to make sure that we prevent a nuclear war. And so far, the nuclear powers have been responsible in managing the nuclear issue. But I can tell you that even though there is a lot of rivalry among the major powers, there have actually been secret talks taking place in Geneva among the 5 permanent members to discuss how to ensure that AI doesn't take over nuclear weapons. So the great powers understand that would be very dangerous to let that happen. So fortunately, most of humanity is not suicidal. So they realize that there are limits that you have to place in the competition. And even though the rivalry certainly between China and the US will increase, and as I document in my book as China Won, the rivalry will also have some guardrails. There are some areas where both sides will agree we don't get close to each other in terms of a military conflict. And so a lot of secret talks are taking place to ensure that those kinds of accidents don't happen along the lines that you suggested might happen. And by the way, when it comes to non-state actors, actually the great powers agree among themselves they should squash the non-state actors. So they work together in that area.
Thank you, Ambassador. So in the interest of time, I know for a fact that a lot of profound questions still coming our way. So I beg your pardon. Ambassador will join us for this
I think we are holding them back from dinner, I think you must all be very hungry by now.
So we will have the privilege of Ambassador for the rest of the evening. And of course, over dinner, maybe request you to please engage with him over the rest of the evening. Over to you, sir. Karthik.
Thank you so much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for him taking all the questions patiently and answering all of them. Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure having you for the event. Thank you so much. Dear guests, as we near the conclusion of this wonderful evening, it is only fitting to invite Mr. George Alexander, Chief Executive Officer, Unifi Mutual Fund, to deliver the vote of thanks. Thanks once again for making this beginning extra special for all of us with your presence.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply honored to deliver the vote of thanks. As the famous American industrialist Henry Ford said, coming together is beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. As we start this journey towards building Unifi Mutual Fund, I'm grateful to be part of this exceptional team. And I want to thank the team for the hard work they have put in to reach where we are now. At the outset, I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed chief guest, Mr. Damodaran. Your remarkable achievements and contributions in the financial services industry are truly inspiring. Thank you, sir, for graciously accepting our invitation and to be with us tonight. I also want to thank Mr. Kishore Mahbubani for this thought-provoking insight on the current geopolitical scenario. Your presence here, all the way from Singapore, is a testament to your commitment to sharing knowledge. Thank you, sir. To our board of directors, my sincere appreciation for the trust, support, and all the support that you have given us as we embark on this exciting journey. To our valued investors, partners, and well-wishers, thank you for your unwavering trust in Unifi's investment approach. Your support means the world to us. Thank you to each and every one of you for making it tonight, and thank you for all the people who've come from different parts of the country, and we are truly honored to have all of you here tonight. Thank you once again, and post this, we invite all of you for cocktails and dinner, and before that, I request all of you to rise for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा। विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा। तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे। गाहे तब जय गाथा। जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।